All right. Hello and welcome to the Four Seasons on Saturday. It's a program dedicated to the career and recordings of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And today we have a special guest also dedicated to the career and recordings of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Our special guest is Mr. Robbie Robinson, the very long-time music director for Frankie Valli. Welcome, Robbie, and it's great to finally have you here.
It is truly an honor to be with you, gentlemen. You guys know way more about the Four Seasons than I ever will, but I am absolutely blessed to be here and spend some time, and we'll talk about one of all of our favorite subjects.
Yes, and thank you for finding the time. It's much appreciated. First, I'll introduce you to our four seniors, our seasoned seniors. We have Ken Charmer in Spain. Ken is a four-season historian, blogger. He's a remasterer and remixer of four-season recordings. But most importantly, for all four-season fans, one of the people most responsible for the four-season legacy box set.
Bravo for that too, Ken.
Yes, yes.
Although, especially the Motown previously unreleased, the Holy Grail for four-season fans. Ken served as the master track advisor for the box set. In Reno, Nevada, we have Chuck Walker, longtime West Coast four-season fan. He was involved in putting together the Ace CD of the four-season Edizione d'Oro album. Then we have George Perez of George Music for All Four Seasons. George has his own YouTube channel, which is four season related material. George is in Los Angeles, where he last met Robbie at the Frankie Valli Walk of Fame ceremony. I'm Tony Colatrella, also known as Anthony, and I'm here now in tropical Pittsburgh. I last saw Robbie here at Frankie Valli concert in April. So Robbie was a multi-instrumentalist, but he's most renowned as a Hammond organ maestro. He's a songwriter, a producer, an arranger, a conductor, and of course, a longtime music director for Frankie Valli. Robbie started in his teenage years in his hometown of Litchfield, Illinois, started with his own rock bands, then performed in St. Louis and toured around the country through the early 70s. In 1976, he and his brother Rex moved to Los Angeles with the intention of securing a recording contract, but they got involved with the jazz rock fusion bands, which were popular at the time, with Alphonse Mouzon of Weather Report, Les DeMerle of Transfusion. Then in 1978, he received a phone call from an old friend that literally changed his career path, changed his life. So Robbie is going to pick it up from there. Okay, Robbie.
So thanks, Anthony. You really know my story. I'm better than I do, as a matter of fact. But thanks for your research. And I would 1976, as you mentioned, we jumped out to L.A. I had been touring around the country from my hometown of Litchfield, my beloved hometown of Litchfield, Illinois. We were only we were there. We had just gotten to town. We had all of our instruments set up in this little apartment. We had no money. I called this guy, Alphonse Mouzon. I saw his number to give lessons at the Guitar Center. And this guy was a big hero of mine. He was the founding drummer of Weather Report. He was a Blue Note jazz artist. He had played with McCoy Tyner for many years. And I called him out of the blue, and something perked his interest. And I got him to come over and jam with us. And he liked what he heard. And he says, I want you guys to join my band. And we had just gotten to LA. And a month later, we were on an album called Blue Note Live at the Roxy with a bunch of the Blue Note jazz stars of the day, Carmen McRae and a bunch of people. And that gave us a thunderbolt lightning kind of entryway into the LA jazz scene, into the LA music scene. If when you're and so much of our business is through word of mouth and credentials, and that gave us instant credentials because people assumed if we were playing with Alphonse Mouzon that we could play, and that just opened up a bunch of doors and to a bunch of gigs and all kinds of stuff. This was in from between 76 and 78. And we did an album with Liza Minnelli, played with Tom Jones, and then I toured with Buddy Greco. We did a tour with Steve March Torme, as you mentioned, playing with Alphonse Mouzon and Les DeMero, with Eddie Harris, with trying to think of some people other that the fans might know. Eddie Harris and Willie Bobo and a bunch of, I mean, we were really, really, really busy for those from 76 to 78. And in 78, I was touring with Buddy Greco. And it was my first time in Vegas, and it was my first time overseas too. And we used to go over to the Talk of the Town in London and play for a month at a time. And here I am, this punk kid conducting these 30-piece orchestras at this prestigious nightclub in London. And it was really kind of heady stuff for me. But let me digress before that. And if anybody has anything to say, don't interrupt. I mean, don't hesitate to interrupt me, please, you know. But back in 1971, my brother Rex, who is a bass player, who was with Frankie Valli in the 4Seasons for over 20 years, and I were playing in these little clubs in the Illinois area, the Southern Illinois area, with a really good friend of ours named Richie Gahate Garcia. Now, so that was my initial connection. So Richie and I and Rex, we were playing in these little bars, and Richie likes to say, yeah, and where they would actually come in on their horses, you know. It was across the street from the fairgrounds in Springfield, Illinois. And Richie had gone up from Puerto Rico and was living in Springfield going to college. And we became dear, dear friends. And then he went up north to finish his schooling up in Chicago. And that's where he ultimately met up with Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons in 1974, if I have my timeline right. And then we toured around the country, as you mentioned, and then we ended up in California. So and Richie and I have kept in touch. And to this day, by the way, Richie Garcia who's really part of the 4Seasons family in many, many, many ways. But Richie Garcia and we kept in touch. And he called me, and then he was working with Frankie since 1974. And in 1978, I got that call that you had mentioned. As a matter of fact, I have a picture of Richie. Let me see if I can put that picture in here. Well, that's not Richie. That's one of the bands, but I do have a picture. I'm assuming you can edit some of this to tighten it up if you want to, but that's not Richie. Here, I wish I. Well, if you look at that picture, Richie, he's kind of hidden there. Let me see if I can see some.
There's actually a picture of him on the Reunited Live album.
Yes, exactly.
Along with you.
There's Richie right there.
Yeah, Richie is right there between my wife and between Frankie Valli's wife. No, that's me. Where is Richie? Oh, he's in the middle holding that tour jacket. Do you remember that tour jacket, Ken?
Yeah.
Holding that looking jacket.
Yeah. All right. So I digress. But now, so back to the story. So 1978, I got this call from Richie Garcia, said Frankie was looking for a guy. And would I be interested? Now, I was working at the time with Buddy Greco touring, and I had been touring with him for a while, and you know I was enjoying it. And Buddy Greco and Frankie Valli were really good friends. And when Frankie Valli knew that I had been working with, well, because I was the music director for Buddy Greco, that gave him instant comfort level with me, because he knew that if I would be Buddy's conductor, I would have something going on. So, but I did not come in as the music director. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to come to play with Frankie Valli. And I remember seeing those guys on TV the 70 seasons on one of the probably the New Year's Eve shows or something, and thinking I would fit into that musical ensemble really well because it just kind of fit my MO, playing jazzy, poppy, diverse music and all that stuff.
In 78 now, Frankie had disbanded that group that you had
Right.
seen, and he was a solo act.
He sacked them, Anthony.
Yes, he disbanded. I use the euphemism there, I guess.
Right.
Uh, but Lee Shapiro stayed with him as his music director. So
Back.
when you came in, did you join the sort of the backup band?
Yes, exactly. Lee Shapiro, when I came in, Lee Shapiro was the music director. And he retained that position until he left at the end of 1978.
Yeah.
So what happened? Yeah, and I was the keyboard player, and there was another keyboard player, Mitch Foreman, too, on that band. So when I joined, there were three. And a matter of fact, the instrument that I played on that tour in 78, the band was an all East Coast band except for myself. I was the only LA guy. And that is right behind me.
Oh, wow.
It's this one right here.
Nice.
It's an Oberheim modular 8 voice. And that's what I had been touring with different acts. It was an expensive instrument. It cost me $10,000 back in 1977, even, you know.
Oh, wow.
So, and it's still one of the classic, great synthesizers. So I came on playing that and playing string parts and stuff like that with Lee. And then go ahead.
I was going to say, so, well, then Frankie decided he wanted to bring the 4Seasons back, reunited.
Before that, Anthony, he stopped touring when there was problems, and Lee decided to leave. I believe there were problems with the backup singers and various issues.
Well, I can give you some perspective on that, Ken.
Yeah,
because I was there, as they say. At the end of 1978, that's when Lee left.
Yeah,
and Frankie wanted and what he wanted to do was put together a West Coast band instead of the East Coast band, and that's when he disbanded, to use your term again, your pun, that particular East Coast band. And so at the end of 78, we did. I remember. At the end of 78, or probably more of I think January 79, it might have been, we did the Golden Globe Awards, and we did a few little dates here and there. And actually, we explored a lot of different musicians, West Coast musicians.
right.
And that's when my brother came into the picture as well.
Right. Well, we found tapes when we were doing the research, 1979, and they run off and on major recording sessions at Sigma and Sunrise, I think, with the studios. This was where the disco album that eventually would become what's in the box set as the Lost Disco album. Those tracks were recorded. And it seems as though most of those were recorded during that time. And I don't know whether Frankie must have been touring off and on between those sessions. But basically, those sessions ran through, but nothing happened with the recordings. And it wasn't until this new lineup was, Anthony was just going to talk about.
Right, in terms of recordings. But from 79 and 80, we were definitely doing gigs.
But did you do any of the studio recordings?
Yes. I've been involved in almost every recording that Frankie has done since I came onto the scene.
Right. So those Lost Disco album tracks that we found and we put in the box set, and then most of them, except for one, are extended versions of what Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio were trying to put together. And they had lots of jazz musicians and all sorts of really notable people playing on those tracks. And obviously they did Heaven Above Me and Soul, but they didn't release anything, and it wasn't until they got the record deal with MCA that anything was done. And they haven't. Some of the recordings were either remixed or redone, and Chris Ford was recording vocals with Frankie during those sessions. But
yes, I remember that.
That seems to that seems to be a slow touring period, a period of change. Is that right?
It was a slow touring period, but we played the Aladdin, I remember, and doing some gigs there.
Yeah.
And some touring, and there were a few different people that we brought in and out too. Some different musicians that might have only done 1 or 2 gigs even. So, but yeah, somewhere I'm not sure the specific timeline, but it's either 80 or 81, right before we did that live album.
Yeah.
That's when Bob and Frankie put together the reunited 4Seasons.
Yeah.
And that's when you sort of officially became the music director?
Well, I became the official music director at the end of 1978
Oh.
when Frankie and Lee and I talked, and Frankie and Lee said, I'm leaving. I remember the 3 of us were all together, and Frankie and Lee both said, well, Robbie's the obvious guy to take over. And that was, and then Lee came back, and it might have been 79, it might have been 80. We did some shows, and Lee came back and did some shows with us, but I was the music director and Lee was the piano player on those,
Right.
which was an interesting change. But Lee as a matter of fact, I spoke with him yesterday. Lee is a dear, dear friend, has been for our whole careers that we've known each other. And he and I have a great relationship and utmost respect for him. He's a great, great guy, a great, great talent. And he's been just a great friend all these years, and a great musical colleague.
Robbie, can we shift topics a little bit?
Sure.
And go back in time. You talked about when you came to Los Angeles or went to Los Angeles, that you got involved in the jazz fusion era. When you were back in Illinois and just starting out, what were the groups, the musical influences that you were most impressed with and you wanted to be like? And a second question to tag onto that is, obviously you're a Hammond organ fan. What made you become a Hammond organ enthusiast?
Okay, and I started out, actually in my first bands, I played saxophone in my first rock and roll bands. I had taken piano lessons from the time I was 6 years old until I was 14. And when I was 14, I started playing in rock and roll bands and playing saxophone, playing a lot of surf kind of stuff, even back in those early game days, some of the surf instrumentals, and like Pipeline and Telstar and Wipeout and some of those kind of songs.
Kind of like the West Coast sound.
Yeah. Interesting. In Illinois, of course, we had but that had just gone across the country. And I'm from Litchfield, where I'm from, is a little farm town of 7,000 people. Now it's 6,000, but it's about an hour outside of St. Louis. And I played all around there. And so I had my own bands. I've always been a band leader, always had my own bands from the time I'm 14. And we covered a lot of the Rascals stuff. We covered Paul Revere and the Raiders. And then I shifted, to get to your question about the organ. I started out playing a Farfisa organ and playing that and just loving that 96 Tears and those kind of songs back in those days. And then the Vox Continental came out and Paul Revere and the Raiders, and I was intrigued by that. And so I sold my Farfisa organ, got a Vox Continental. And then when I heard Felix Cavalieri of the Rascals, and I heard that Hammond organ, I went and got a Hammond organ. And that was 1968. I bought my first Hammond organ, and I still have that same Hammond organ. It sits at my church, and I play it every Sunday, and it's still dear to me. And that was my first Hammond organ, a Hammond C3 with 2 Leslies, and I now have 16 Hammond organs. That's how crazy I am.
Jeez, that's nice.
But I love the Hammond organ. The Hammond organ it's the Harley Davidson of musical instruments. If you put your hands on a Hammond organ, as a matter of fact, let's go over here. You'll see one of my dear Hammond organs. You'll see 2 of them actually there, right there. That's the Hammond organ. But there's no other keyboard that really sounds like that, and I just love it.
Can I go ahead and ask a question here?
Yes, sure.
Yes. Robbie, had you been familiar with the music of Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons? And were you a fan?
obviously I'm familiar with it. I've been I'm a passionate music historian, lover, and I love all kinds of music from Bach to Bo Diddley, as they say.
Got
But
it.
yes, of course, I was a Four Seasons fan because those songs are fantastic, amazing songs. And one of the things that I have seen now for 46 years, if you can imagine that, being with those guys, I have seen audiences for decades and for generations responding to those amazing songs of Bob Gaudio and the other cast of great writers. But
Beautiful.
so how can you not be a fan of that great music? Yes, I was a fan. A lot of my bands did not do those songs very often because we didn't have a Frankie Valli to sing them. It was not easy
Right.
songs to cover. So
Right. One more question here. Do you remember your first concert you did with Valli and the Seasons? Can you share that with us?
yes, I do. I remember that when I got hired over the phone, and I said, okay, I was with Buddy Greco. I have another quick digress story here.
Sure.
When I got the call to go with Frankie Valli, I also had a call at the same time to go with Morris Albert. Now, do you guys remember Morris Albert?
Yielding.
There you go.
Yeah.
And at the time or close to it, that was the biggest song in the world. And that was his first record, Feelings. Yeah.
Oh, that was huge.
It was huge. And so I got the call to go with him. And so I had to make the decision, do I go with Frankie, who at that time was kind of an oldies artist of sorts, although Grease was big, but still he was categorized as kind of an oldies artist, or Morris Albert, who had the biggest song in the world, this upcoming guy. And I didn't think twice, really. I didn't think too long about it. That I obviously made the right choice because Morris Albert had one hit.
That was it.
Yeah, that was a wise choice.
So what? Now I forgot. What was your question about? It was.
If you remembered your first concert, can you share that with us?
So I got the call and I said, "Well, guarantee me 2 weeks, and I'll quit Buddy Greco and join you guys." And Lee picked me up, and I was in LA. They were on the East Coast. The whole band, again, like I said, was an East Coast band. Lee Shapiro picked me up at the airport, went through and showed me a few things. We went to a little studio. He showed me a couple of things. And the first gig was at Garden State Arts Center in Homedale, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And but I played behind the curtain, because I really hadn't had a rehearsal or anything. So I played behind the curtain just to kind of get my feet wet. And that was my first concert.
And this was in 78.
Yeah, that was in 78. Yeah.
So one thing about that time is that a lot of the arrangements the group were using were written by Charlie Calello or updated by Lee. And so when you picked them up, I mean, did it take long to sort of pick up that work, and how did you move forward with it?
Well, I played the rest of 78, as the keyboard player with Lee leading the charge. And then in 79, I got all the scores, all the charts and everything. And that's something that's always been comfortable for me, is to read scores and to study and orchestration. I've always done that all my life, conducted orchestras.
Amazing.
So that was comfortable in that regard. I got to work alongside Charlie Calello very closely on many things. Charlie was a great guy, and Artie Schreck, of course. Both those guys are absolute geniuses.
Yeah.
And Lee, of course. And we adapted. And one of Frankie Valli's traits is he likes change in many respects. Maybe not in everything, but he loves to keep the music fresh a little bit. He always pushing, even if it's just changing an ending or an introduction or a middle section, or let's take this section out or and he's always tweaking and stuff. And so we always, from the time I took over, we've been changing things up to just this week.
Well, that's
And you know, Robbie, those
man.
changes and tweaks are so noticeable.
Yeah. I was going to say,
It's incredible.
I spent over 2,000 hours going
I
through
know.
the tapes, going through the tapes that were transferred over by Bill England to the UK. And so I spent every afternoon sort of listening, flipping through, discovering stuff. Well, the one thing that became evident to me, and the one disc that's particularly relevant in that is the Motown Unreleased, is that I found 8 or 9, 10 alternative versions of songs that were released on Motown. And they just had a slightly different ending. They just had a slightly different vocal arrangement.
Right.
And Anthony knows this. There's one track, Anthony, where there's about 3 different versions with the background singers. And
Hold on.
You can't hold on. And in that, the background singer on the best version that we like most is sort of mimicking and mirroring every note that Frankie's doing. And Frankie must have done and I think it's take 6. So, I mean, we've got no idea of how many takes Frankie would do with either Bob Crewe or with Bob Gaudio to get things to the point where they were happy to release it. But I remember this story about, and this fits exactly with what you're saying, with the Inside You album, which was released after they'd left Motown. And Bob Gaudio said he wasn't happy because he hadn't been able to mix it. And what had happened is Russ Tarana, who was the top Motown mixer throughout the early 70s, had mixed the songs from 16-track and put all sorts of echo and overdubs on them. And the strange thing was that the mixes that were sent to Bob Gaudio and I found were different. And those were the ones that Bob Gaudio would have preferred to have had released and Frankie would have had released. But it just shows this exploratory nature, more so than anywhere else, because that's where we found so much alternative material.
Wow.
Jesus Christ.
It's just amazing to find that. And I don't know if you've heard any of those Motown unreleased recordings, but Frankie's vocal is beyond belief on them.
Frankie was really at the top of his game in those days. I mean, what a voice of God, no question about it, a gift from God.
You bet.
Robbie, can we go back to your earlier influence in the 70s on the West Coast when you came out? You mentioned Paul Revere and Mark Lindsay of the Raiders,
yes,
which I grew up with.
Is that
right? Did they influence you directly, or was it their producers and the music that their producers were having them play at the time?
Well, they influenced me in the 60s, not in the 70s. And so in the 60s bands that I had in those days, because that's pretty much when they were popular, the mid to late 60s. And they influenced me and so my bands would do their songs. And that's how they influenced me. But by the time I got into the 70s, my musical tastes had changed more towards the Weather Reports and the Chick Coreas and Herbie Hancock's
more the jazz fusion.
Yeah, and by the way, in the 70s ago, a lot of the more sophisticated pop groups really started to come in there. But again, I go back to I love pop music in general. I love music that has broad appeal. I'm fascinated by music that touches hearts and souls through generations and through centuries, like Mozart. If you listen to Mozart, it still connects with people. If you listen to Tchaikovsky, it still connects to people. When you listen to Paul McCartney, Billy Joel, it still connects to people. And the same with Bob Gaudio. All those songs. And so I love pop music and I'm not a big fan of, I can appreciate straight ahead jazz. I'm a jazz buff, but I'm not a fan of music that only connects with 10 people. I'd rather reach 10,000 people,
Right.
So is it the vocal or the instrumental part that influences you the most?
Oh boy, there's a question. Well, those are two different palettes, aren't they? Two different canvases that you paint
I
your
know, I realize
picture
that.
on.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't
And
ask the question.
and I mean, but I love instrumental music. I mean, I'm a big Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky. I love Booker T and the MGs. They were one of my
Yeah,
early
yeah,
influences with that. Jimmy Smith, I'll go back to the Hammond organ influences. There
yeah,
are
yeah.
three primary Hammond organ influences in my
Yes.
life. Jimmy Smith is the guru, the godfather of the Hammond organ. He's the one who put the organ on the map, the
Yeah.
Hammond B3, and he's a great jazz player. He was a great jazz player, the greatest of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with
And
you.
yeah, nobody like ever like, and so he was a primary influence. So when I started playing Hammond organ in the '60s, 68, I started listening to Jimmy Smith, and then also Felix Cavalieri, because for my 2 cents, Felix Cavalieri of the Rascals put the Hammond organ on the map for rock pop music.
Clearly, yes.
And
Yeah.
then the third influence, and I know a couple of these guys will know this answer, but is Mark Stein from the band Vanilla Fudge. He is one of my big influences too. And he was influenced directly by Felix Cavalieri. And they were all influenced by Jimmy Smith.
Wow. Interesting.
Did,
But I still, to this day, I love to listen to music and study and listen, and no matter what the style, the genre. So I love straight ahead jazz. I love pop. I love jazz. I love R&B. I love soul. And I love whatever. So instrumental and vocals. It's, again, two palettes, but I can appreciate and dig into both sides of that fence.
What
So,
one
so
thing
as you're arranging
didn't
new
come up.
arrangements,
My
The,
arrangements,
your broad vision of all these sounds comes together, and you pick the pieces from the different sounds that you figure would best fit the audience to get the most people involved. That's great.
I think the best arrangers have always picked, taken music from the classics, taken music from Duke Ellington. And, by the way, Frankie Valli's favorite group, I'm assuming you guys know this, is Stan Kenton.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, from the big band era like that. By the way, one of the big blessings for me, I've been so blessed in so many ways, guys. But one of the big blessings when I was with Buddy Greco, we spent a whole week uh, playing a gig with the Count Basie Orchestra. So we had the Count Basie Orchestra was our band for that whole week when, we would do our show with the Count Basie Orchestra and they would do their show with Count. And so I got to conduct the Count Basie Orchestra and hang out with Count Basie for a whole week one time. And it was just,
Wow.
Must have
Just-
been fun.
yeah.
If I could mention real quick, you mentioned Stan Kenton. Stan Kenton graduated from Bell High School, which is about 3 blocks from where I'm at right now, which
I
is
didn't
where I
know
also
that.
graduated from. Yeah, Bell High School here in Bell,
Wow.
California.
Ah.
Anyway,
Frankie
Yeah.
loves Stan Kenton. You can hear that. Of course, Charlie put that bop 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 in
oh yeah.
and Can't Take My Eyes Off You,
Yeah.
Ah,
Well,
I love it.
What about producers in terms of? Did you ever meet Bob Crewe?
Oh yeah, Bob. I was blessed to work with Bob Crewe many, many times in the studio.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, what was that? What was that like? Because everything we've heard about him has been that he's so amazing in the studio, that he has this huge motivation, and he hears things in his head, and he somehow communicates that. But he didn't write music. He wrote lyrics, and
Right.
we don't. It's hard to believe that he could do so much.
Well, Bob Crewe had a musical soul, and he didn't have the academic ability to notate his visions or anything like that, but he was super creative. Plus, he was, one of the marks of a great producer is being able to herd all the cats and kind of
Yes.
steer the ship. And he had that great ability as well. And his lyrics are to me, they're like poetry. I mean, just a genius lyrically. But he was also a fan of classical music, as you probably know, and he got a lot of his ideas and his musical visions from just from the oral perspective of listening to that music.
Wow.
Do you think he's underappreciated today as a producer?
Without question.
Because his BMI listing has got over 1,000 songs in it, and
Yes.
his production career is in the 60s and the 70s. It's just amazing. And I was hearing Kenny Nolan talking on a show George had posted today about My Eyes Adored You, and the sheer creative talent that came out of those sessions.
That's right. No, I agree. Bob Crewe, interesting you mentioned Kenny Nolan. While we were talking, he just called me. But
Kenny Nolan.
All right, Kenny, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Kenny's a friend, though, and he lives over in Calabasas, not too far from where Frankie's place is.
Well, okay. Well, I don't know how far we get into the show, but there's quite a few Kenny Nolan songs. And there's one that you were involved with that is a little bit later on. We haven't quite reached that, and it's called Killing Time.
Yeah, that's a great song.
And we haven't heard that until this release. It hasn't been released until last year.
Is that right? I know through the years, there have been so many times we would go in the studio and explore and record songs. And I mean, we were busy touring and going in and out of town, and Bob and I don't know where those things are, but that's a great song. And we've talked, I think we went in and cut it 2 or 3 different times too, as a matter of fact.
There's an extended version which I've got, which I hopefully post on YouTube sometime. But you also after you'd come out of we haven't finished talking about the Reunited Live album yet, because before we move on to the 80s, when you were doing the Reunited Live album, there was this big accident when you were touring during the storm, and a couple of the guys got hurt, Jerry Corbetta and Jerry Polchi. Now, we heard on the grapevine at the time, because I was involved in the fan clubs and newsletters, that as a result, you'd have to go into the studio to record some of the songs. But another story was that the sound recording wasn't that good. And so Charlie Calello came in and you recorded more of the tracks in the studio.
Well, I'm hesitating because it's a little fuzzy. That was 40 some years ago.
Yeah, it was.
But I mean, I remember the storm. We were playing in Philadelphia, and there was that big mall. There was a big mall that we were playing. It was a 4th of July thing, if I remember right. And and I remember our sound man, who's since passed away, but he had a recording of that when it happened, and you can hear there was this almost a mini tornado that just came through this area, sudden rain, rain gushing, and it happened in the middle of December 63. We were doing that. Frankie was on the wings of the stage because Jerry Polchi was singing it. And this light tower, they had those L-shaped kind of towers there in front of the stage and in the back of the stage. And I remember when that came through and the crowd gasped. We have a recording of that somewhere. And the tower leaned forward, leaned back, leaned forward, and then came crashing down on the band. And it smashed the drums. Polchi got out of the way just in the nick of time. As you mentioned, Jerry Corbetta, he got his hand cut and had to go to surgery. And Toby Tyler, who was one of the background singers, fell off the back of the stage and had a gash in her head.
Oh, Jesus. Wow.
And then so we went, and then our next gig was before we did the album. I think we were playing Washington D.C. at that big outdoor venue there, and we went there and did a gig. But I remember they had to dry out the synthesizer right there behind me was there, and all dry out equipment, and I had to reprogram synthesizers and all. It was quite a deal. But I don't remember specifically going in and re-recording anything. I don't think we did, but I mean, we could have because
the two singles from that concert.
Heaven Must Have Sent You. Was that?
Love, yeah. Yeah, they were recorded in the studio. Charlie confirmed.
Right.
But overall, that album launched the tour, and you came back to the UK.
Right.
We all saw you on that tour, and it was a fantastic tour. And
Great
then,
memories of that.
and
By the
then,
way, wasn't that shirt that you're wearing, was that the logo at the time, or was that later? I can't remember.
I think it was at the time. Yeah, I think it was because it was a handshake.
Yeah, what?
Yeah, that's
Late
the
70s, 80s.
Yeah, 81, and then the whole thing, well, from our point of view, collapsed because the fan
Right.
club collapsed and no communications came out because Frankie had lost his daughter and he lost his second daughter, and his father had a major stroke, and so we'd heard that he had a bit of a obviously had a family breakdown personally, because that's a terrible trauma to go through. And the fan clubs had all collapsed by this time, and we weren't hearing anything, except that we heard that he was back on the road again in '82.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I remember, I don't remember any time where we actually took, for example, a whole year off. We had always been
I believe he was
record,
only on a couple of months.
And I remember the night that Frankie heard about his daughter, and we were getting ready to go on stage.
Oh, wow.
And Frankie got the phone call about Francine, and that was just I mean, none of us can imagine to deal with that.
No.
But Frankie Valli, he went on and did the show that night.
Oh, wow.
And then and then after the show, then we canceled some of the other shows, and then he went back and dealt with all that. But Frankie Valli, he is such an enigma, the most tenacious human being I've ever known, the most driven human being I've ever known. He's got so many extraordinary talents. I mean, beyond his amazing voice, of course, but he is he could be a great manager for just about any artist because he's a great manager.
Right.
But he also, one of the things that he does is Frankie Valli has a great ability at evaluating talent, particularly music talent, but not even that. For example, the sound companies that he's helped to start, like Clare Brothers and like Maryland Sound, like studio engineers that he knows. And he was always great about, no matter what team is around him, whether it's Charlie Colello or Bob Crewe or Bob Gaudio or anybody, he knows how to push everybody to get the best that they possibly can be. And that's one of his gifts, no question about it.
Yeah, he knew the end result that he wanted and transmitted that to others.
And hence here he is at age 90. We're going on tour Thursday again, so.
Yeah.
Well, when you were messing around in '82 and we were taping shows and somebody turned up this show, I don't know where it was, but you did a song called "You're Never Too Old to Rock and Roll," and
I
Frankie
love
said,
it. Yeah.
"This is going to be on our new album," and somebody recorded it, and that is the only complete recording we have of that song, because we found the tapes in the storage, and it said 4 Seasons, and it listed all these tracks, including "You're Never Too Old to Rock and Roll." But when you play it, it's all instrumentals with a bit of Jerry Corbetta singing.
Oh, but no Frankie yet, huh?
No Frankie on it. Well, Frankie came in on the last notes on "You're Never Too Old to Rock and Roll."
Yeah.
But we did find a tape in storage with 3 tracks on, which were obviously destined for this album. One was "Deep in Your Love," one was "Gypsy Woman," and the other one was "Testing the Waters." And the only one that tied in with the previous tape was "Testing the Waters," which we had instrumentally. So we know that some vocals were laid down, but that's all that we were ever able to find in the storage. But saying that, there's still 200 tapes there. So
they could be there. Yeah, obviously, one of the, I do remember "Never Too Old to Rock and Roll." We used to do it live, and we did go into the studio at least once. We might have gone in multiple times and recorded it. It was a cool song. I think it was written by Corbetta and Crewe, maybe. Was it Corbetta and Frankie, maybe?
They credit Frank. Yeah, Corbetta and Valli.
Yeah, that's it. Great. Yeah.
There you go, Anthony.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a suggestion. Why don't you have Frankie start the show with that 90-year-old Frankie singing that to start the show. I think that would be
That'd be
Well,
great.
interesting that you would say that, because Frankie and I have talked about bringing that song back in the show for many, many years. So
I
you
think
never know.
I think you should try it. I think you should try it. If this is the final encore, then that's the message to leave, isn't it, with everybody?
Yeah, well, who knows what let me be clear, because there's such a misunderstanding about it, and I probably don't have the definitive view. There probably is no definitive view on that, but basically, putting out the final encores does not mean that Frankie has a particular time that he is going to retire. He's going to retire, basically, I think, this is just my opinion, when he can't do it anymore for some reason.
Yeah.
And I mean, he loves the stage. He hates to travel, but he loves to walk on the stage. I mean, that's where he's home. And he's going to continue to sing and perform as long as he possibly can. And so we're not going to say, okay, November the 1st is going to be the final show. That's not ever going to happen.
Robbie,
I don't think.
Robbie, you've been doing this for so many years now, and you've done so many live concerts. Surely you must have taped some of those shows.
Oh, I have a lot of tapes somewhere around here.
Oh boy.
Well,
Nice.
we have a few too.
I bet. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they've been taping shows since when they were actually tape, as opposed to other alternative methods.
The earliest tape we found is 1964.
Wow.
That was in Tommy DeVito's personal collection, and it was uncovered by Rex Woodard, who wrote Tommy's biography, which became Jersey Boys, as you know. And it's a 4-song set, and it's on a cassette from 1964, and it absolutely is brilliant. And it's in the box set. We managed to get it into the box set.
Fantastic.
And the engineer restored it. And that, we haven't got anything earlier than that, but there's very little from the 60s that made it from the board or from the stage recorded.
One of the things that I pick up on one of your comments is the 4Seasons, Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons, from even those early days, always were great performers, and they always sounded great. And I remember, for example, the guys from Steely Dan, what's his name? The keyboard player, but they used to be Jay and the Americans band.
That's right.
And I remember seeing them in the airport one time, and they were telling one of our guys that we used to open up for the 4Seasons. They would always blow us off the stage,
So true.
That's
true.
No,
Yeah.
Frankie is an interesting guy.
And by the way, that goes back to Frank. I think Frankie's personality. He always made sure that act, that the music coming off that stage was as good as it possibly could be. And it goes back to something else I've seen over and over people saying. Frankie Valli still goes to every sound check. Even at 90 years young, no other star anywhere close to his age goes on and does the sound checks. But Frankie is so invested. He's so engaged in every note that we play. He wants to be there and make sure everything's 100%.
Frankie is the ultimate professional. His mentor, the guy he likes to imitate, is Sinatra. He followed Sinatra and saw Sinatra always came out impeccably dressed. The orchestra was totally in line, and Frankie wants it that way. You see some of these other groups, like some of the West Coast groups, they come out in jeans and ripped up T-shirts and just dancing all over the stage. But Valli's shows are always totally professional.
No question about it. And that goes right back to Frankie. And as you said, his idol, his hero was, and who he modeled himself out, of course, was Frank Sinatra, who's the chairman of the board. And Tony Orlando, who's a dear friend, calls Frankie Valli the new chairman of the board.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. Yep.
So how have you and Frankie changed the arrangements over the years? As He's got older, you've got
We
older.
change it. We change them all the time. We were just rehearsing a couple weeks ago and changed some things. We changed some stuff in Who Loves You.
Wow. Well,
Now Bob doesn't always like their changes,
no.
but
you changed the night, and everybody, all the fans in the UK were talking about it because
I know
in 2011, 2012, you decided to. I don't know whether Frankie decided or you decided to do the night.
That was he and I. That was he and I, and we wanted to do a whole different version. One of the things Frankie Valli has always said to me, and I know you guys have heard this before. If you're going to do a cover of something, then make it your own.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah. The night in those days was the night in those days with Bob Gaudio singing it, obviously, singing most of the lead.
Yeah.
So when we revised it, we changed it dramatically and decided to take it totally left. And another thing Frankie Valli always says, don't be afraid to change things, around. And you can, like, one of the things we did is Silence is Golden. We changed that a lot. Another song that has gone through Beggin' has gone through quite a few permutations through the years,
Well, obviously it's been changed by various mixers at various times, and so it's a hugely popular and well-known song right across the world, particularly in Europe. So you were valid to change it, but the only release of that version of the night. Before it was in the box set, the one you did in 2012 there were two versions. There was one on a double CD of called "Working My Way Back to You," released in the UK to coincide with your tour in 2012.
Yes, I remember.
And
that. That's why we did it. That was the only one that was different, right, Ken? Because we had to add that song to that box set. We decided to do our own new version of that.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people bought it. Because obviously it's a top UK song, and it took Frankie to number 7 in the charts immediately after Mars Adored You and before Who Loves You, but it never did anything in America. In fact, it was never released.
One of those funny things, isn't it amazing to see how some songs can make it in UK and they don't make it in the US and vice versa?
Yeah. If I can ask a question here, Robbie, what are your thoughts on that massive box set that came out a little over a year ago? And do you think Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio, were they 100% in on the project? Because there didn't seem to be a lot of promotion on their end for the release.
I don't know in their heart of hearts where they were at with that thing. I think it's an extraordinary compilation of and the ultimate fan experience for any Four Seasons fans. I know that both of them talked a lot about it and were excited about it as far as I could see. So I'm not sure, in terms of promotion. I mean, both Frankie and Bob Gaudio have so much going on in their worlds. That
I'm sure they do.
I don't know.
Bob Gaudio had a big problem with it because basically all the Motown stuff was session tapes. So you have the full sessions. So the whole of the Chameleon sessions, all of the sessions done with Michael Massa and other producers were there. And I know there are at least 43 mixes of the night on it, on those tapes. So I don't think, I know for a fact that Bob was very reluctant to have to mix from 16 track, and he wanted 2-track stereo mixes. An arrangement was reached, and he did mix some of the 13 tracks that are in that box that he approved. But we know there are over 30 tracks there that were completed. And we don't know why he only picked 13, and he's never said anything, and he didn't give us any feedback on what he found. But we know the stuff's still there, and so that's why we still have the 4 Seasons Motown Unreleased campaign going, because we still want the rest. But that's down to him, really, and it's also down to record companies, because the only thing that seems to be selling these days is vinyl.
Yeah, and businesses, the way people consume music has changed so dramatically in the last decade, of course. And where the record business is and all that kind of stuff. But the catalog of the Four Seasons is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, the number of recordings and great musical moments through the generations and decades. So I have a feeling by the time we're all long gone, there'll still be fans of the Four Seasons listening to new stuff here and there, you know.
They'll be digging stuff up. But actually, Bob Audio only turned down 4 of over 830 tracks that we listed.
That's extraordinary.
He asked me to send him 29. And,
wow. And he's a busy guy. I mean, he's got so much going on, and he's such a creative guy too. Both he and Frankie. So sometimes they don't like to look in the rear view mirror, I don't think, as much as they want to keep moving forward with new creative adventures.
And Bob Gaudio has said that.
He said that. He said it's sometimes very hard to go back to these times because particularly the Motown period was a very painful period for marriage breakups and the like for both Frankie and Bob. And so, there are songs reflect that. Bob Gaudio's compositions reflect very painful love relationship issues that comes out in the songs. Love isn't here like it used to be. They but one. And so we understand that and we empathize with the difficulty. But as music fans, we love Frankie's voice so much. We just want to keep hearing another variation on it, on another song.
Oh, what a voice this guy was gifted with, huh?
Maybe jump ahead on an album that you were involved with, the Street Fighter album. What was your impressions of the songs on the Street Fighter album?
Oh, I'd have to revisit what they are. Candidly, Frankie and I both still love Street Fighter, and we still bring it back in and out of the show here and there. What are some of the songs on that record? We love doing that song.
Veronica.
That record. Yeah. Veronica. Oh. We love Veronica, man.
I love that whole album. The whole album is just
great. A good album.
I love it. It's great.
Well, Charlie arranged a lot of those songs, and Sandy was involved in writing a number of them. So they all come from a good place. But the interesting thing was it was starting to chart in the UK, Book of Love. And you were all due to fly over. And then there was news of imminent bombings in London. And so the tour was cancelled and the BBC dropped the single and it fell out the charts. So
that was a fun version too. That's my brother Rex doing all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, that's great. That's great. He sounds great. Really, really
and
good.
Even the dance mixers that when they dance mixed did versions of that in 94 for the dance
we
album.
did that on a couple TV shows too, Ken. I remember.
Yeah, he did. Well, the video isn't it on the when did he do this? I'm trying to remember when we saw him do Street Fighter. Do you remember, Anthony?
Well, he did a video himself. Yeah, a music video of Street Fighter.
Right.
Oh yeah, but I mean, we did Book of Love on a TV show a couple times, I think.
Yeah, it was a benefit, like a muscular dystrophy.
Maybe, but seems like I remember doing like Solid Gold or one of those kind of shows with that song.
Yeah. Right.
They haven't turned up on YouTube yet, but we'll keep chasing them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But you've also moved on to the very strangest album of the whole box set, and that is Hope and Glory. Now, just what happened with that?
Well, we all love that record, tell you the truth.
I love it.
And a bunch of those songs we have tossed around the idea of bringing them in the show. What's the one that's got the big chorus at the end? Is it Hope and Glory, I think?
Hope and Glory's got a couple choruses.
Yeah.
Love Has a Mind of Its Own is
Love Has a Mind. We even talked about maybe bringing in a choir some places and doing that.
It's very much choral on the vocals.
Hope and Glory is an interesting song to me.
Yeah.
A little background. my wife and I saw the Seasons a week before I found the album at Virgin Records in Tokyo. He had never
Wow.
talked about it.
Yeah.
And it was just right after it came out. And I listened to Hope and Glory, and I love both the instrumental and the vocals. But Hope and Glory is a tie between all kinds of music.
Yes.
It's got the pop, it's got the rock, it's got the country. The story is all there. It's one of those keeper stories, but there was never any PR on it, and you never heard it.
It wasn't. It wasn't actually released in the UK. It was never released in the UK.
Is there a reason the partnership doesn't promote their albums?
I have a feeling there was some sort of contractual mishap somewhere along the line, and Frankie and Bob decided to just drop it.
I don't think that at least as far as Frankie, I have never heard of Frankie saying, let's don't promote this for whatever reason. I think it goes back to Street Fighter. It goes back to Hope and Glory. For some reason, the record labels haven't gotten on board with some of those songs, some of those records and stuff. And for whatever reason, but that is a great record. And Street Fighter is a great record, in my opinion. And so is Hope and Glory. And
love them both.
Well,
by the time 1994 had come, Frankie was back in the charts again with the dance remix of December '63, and so the whole dance remixes set off. And some of those dance remixes, some of the Hope and Glory tracks, "Who Loves You," December '63, etc., all came together in a great set of dance mixes in '94.
Oh, really?
But that was basically the last we heard of anything being released. But we do know that in 2002, Bob Gaudio was interviewed by Stuart Miller in the UK, the late Stuart Miller, sadly killed in a motorcycle accident. But he was talking to Bob, and Bob said that you'd done some stuff around 2000 with the band, and it was sort of up tempo, December '63 style of.
Right, I remember that kind of. Yeah.
And he was talking about the possibility of trying to get a record label interested. But of course, nothing happened. And then, of course, Jersey Boys took over. And so if ever you're talking to Bob Gaudio, just remind him that we would like to have those unreleased tracks from 2000 that you did. He owes it to you, surely.
I'll bring it up to him at some point in time. Yeah. And Bob is a great guy, and he's been a great he's been a great boss, because ultimately Frankie and Bob are my bosses,
Exactly.
And the partnership that is illustrated on your shirt there, Ken.
Yeah.
But it is a marriage made in heaven, a musical marriage made in heaven, those two guys. And very few successes like that those two guys have. It's obviously hasn't been a home run after home run, but the batting average is pretty stinking good if you really evaluate it.
Yeah, it is.
I agree.
I think there's an awful lot of stuff down to the lack of perception in the music business and amongst record companies that they are a legacy group of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that there should be more focus on the possibility of making money out of this music. We hope that, and that's the focus Anthony particularly and I are doing on the social media groups, is trying to push for another level of appreciation to hit home, and for somebody to sort of take over the mantle sort of from Bob and Frankie, and sort of carry it forward. I mean, you've got all these tapes, so
well, we'll see what how the future holds. But I can tell you that Frankie and Bob and me and everybody in the whole 4Seasons family is super appreciative of all four of you gentlemen and everybody else who are such great supporters and promoters of all things 4Seasons. I mean, it's fantastic to have you guys around promoting things.
Well, I've got a few leftovers from the 4 years and the 2,000 hours, stuff that didn't get into the box set.
Wow.
So I'm edging those towards YouTube because that seemed to be the place where we can share it without problems, without copyright problems or issues with Bob and Frankie. And hopefully they appreciate that all we're trying to do is open up the reputation to a bigger audience. And I have to say, one thing that showed this to me and showed the potential was I discovered the tape of the disco mix of Swearing to God.
Oh wow, very cool.
The original safety copy, and it had a break in it. And wow. I thought, well, we can't put it in the box set. We just discarded it. Anyway, I went back to it a year or so ago, and I cut the space out and found that it was a perfect join. It just stuck. The tape had just stuck.
So they stopped and then re-recorded and picked it up.
I think it was a transfer problem. You know, when they were doing the transfers from the master tape, it just stuck and then started again. Or something happened. But anyway, I joined it together and it was a perfect, and it's the longest ever version, 10 minutes, 50 something seconds. And I did a sort of a spatial remix of it to just sort of make it fill the room like you do. And as an attempt to do something like you do. And I put it out on YouTube. And within 2 weeks, it had 13,000 views.
Wow.
Yeah.
2 weeks. And that's the most views of anything I've ever put on the YouTube channels at all. And to this day, I'm saying, well, we need to really make Frankie aware of it. And hopefully, if we can work together in the future, there's opportunities whilst we're still alive to do something great again. Notwithstanding the box set is the greatest thing we've ever been able to achieve. And
that was an enormous achievement. And that song, Swearing to God, I spoke. I had a neat conversation with Danny Randell a couple days ago, and that was kind of fun. And we were talking about that song.
Yeah, it's a great
one.
You played on it.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah. Well, one of the Georgie Young, was the sax soloist on that. And Georgie Young, he lives over here in Camarillo, not too far from me. And so, he's become a really good friend. And a colleague, I've used him on different, like he's played at my church a couple of times with me, and he's been on my Jam and Java show and stuff. And Frankie just loves Georgie's playing too. So much so, as a matter of fact, if you see us live, the sax solo that Rick Keller plays every night is a note-for-note recreation of Georgie Young's solo from that record.
Wow. Yeah, that Rick Keller's awesome. Robbie, let me ask you, how are you doing with Robbie's records? I'm a big fan. Your Jam and Java show seems to be really, really growing. How's all that coming along?
It's been such a fun thing for me, such an opportunity. I mean, one of the things that when I came out to California was to pursue my own music. And and then I kept getting gigs,
Yeah.
And so I kept doing and so here I am 46 years later with Frankie all these years. But and so the fun thing for me was during the pandemic, after being on the road for a lifetime, all of a sudden I was not on the road and we were all stuck in our wherever we were stuck. And I was stuck in my studio here as I'm coming to you now. And so that's where the idea of Robbie's Records. And I started recording a lot of songs and digging off the shelves, songs that I'd had, building up. They called them we used to call them dashboard demos, things that we record and then they go sit on the shelf for decades. And pulling that out. And so, and I kind of put it together and created this platform, Robbie's Records, which is an opportunity for me to put out my own music or my own collaborations of songs. And it's really been a lot of fun and it's going great guns. We really started the YouTube, the Robbie's Records about a year and a half ago now, something like that. We did one thing a couple years ago, but on a different format, but we're over 8 million views now on Robbie's records, and we've got three songs that are over 1 million each, which is really cool.
That is something else. The way that channel has grown, and like you just said, the views. It's awesome. I mean, you got to feel great about that.
I do. I really. And interestingly enough, one of the songs that is doing really well is my own cover of "Tell It to the Rain," which is a Frankie Valli song, as you well know.
Oh my God, that is so good. Oh well, your work and Sarah's vocals, my God, that
she's
woman is just.
And I had the fun experience of last week. We played in New Jersey, and Mike Petrillo and Chubby Cifelli both came to the show, and hanging out with both those guys. And when I released that song, "Tell It to the Rain," was written by Chubby Cifelli and Mike Petrillo, and I played it for them first, and they both gave me a hearty thumbs up. And then I played it for Frankie, which was, I wasn't sure how he would take that, but I played it for Frankie, and he says, "Yeah, that's really cool." And then I said it. He said, "You should send it to Gaudio," and I did. I sent it to Gaudio, and Gaudio gave me a thumbs up too. So I feel really happy about that.
Well done. I must look that up. Be great.
Now, and it goes back to what Frankie has told me, and I've said it over and over. Whenever you do a cover, make it your own. So my version of "Tell It to the Rain" is totally different than Frankie's and the 4Seasons version, and it's very Hammond organ centric, because that's what I do, and Sarah Nimitz just kills it. And but it also takes that song, because in looking at the lyrics, Frankie's version is a little more melodic, and the lyrics don't conjure up melody and harmonious. It to me, they conjure up anger and retaliation. Exactly. So we did it sort of an angry kind of version,
The female sing it from the female perspective of sort of someone was kind of, snubbed or something, and she's
Great stuff. Okay.
I had one question about, of course, Jersey Boys became a great success, but it seemed to me that, I don't know who was responsible, the format of the 4Seasons changed even before Jersey Boys, going from the traditional singer-musician to the singer-younger dancer. Although it seems to be patterned after Jersey Boys, I thought it kind of even preceded that. So I was wondering sort of what led to that change. Whose idea was that? Was that Frankie?
That is fascinating. And it's I'll have an interesting answer for you. And I think a lot of fans think we are trying to emanate Jersey Boys. No, that's not the case at all. Right around 1999, 2000, Frankie, I remember I was here at home, and he called me. He says, "I've got this idea." He wanted to put together 4 singer-dancer guys, kind of like the boy bands of the time, the Backstreet Boys and those kind of things. And also, I think it was, now I'm not 100% sure, but we used to tour with the 4 Tops, if you remember.
I was going to say the 4 Tops before anybody else.
Exactly. And when we would play with the 4 Tops, the Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons, generally speaking, were always a band of singing musicians. Every now and then we would have some background singers, but generally singing musicians. But the 4 Tops, when they would come out and do their show, I mean, they've got 4 guys out there working the audience, and it really it creates a lot of excitement. And I think that might have been part of, because he always said, you see when you've got those 4 guys out there working. So it was Frankie's idea to put together revamp the show where we have musicians who just play, singers who just sing and dance around him. And that was the idea of the new revamped idea of Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons. And we started that right around 2000, I think 99 or 2000. And then that does predate Jersey Boys. So, and the music director and the directors came out and watched us perform too, don't forget. So I'm sure that but you know what they did was probably a natural idea. I mean, you take those 4 guys, and it's more exciting in a theatrical performance to have them sing and dance and do all the stuff that they do. Of course, Tommy DeVito, Bob Gaudio, Nick Massey, and Frankie Valli would never do that kind of dancing in those days, you know. Although Frankie might a little bit if you look at those early Ed Sullivan performances.
Frankie was a great dancer. He had some good foot movements.
You see in those Four Lovers videos, you know, you see him dancing around like a wild man.
He was awesome on his feet. Oh my God! Yes,
he was doing the moonwalk before Michael Jackson.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. But bringing those four singers, dancers, I think it was great. It brought the band forward, and the audience loves it. The audience loves it,
and it's more entertaining. And the less that Frankie, I mean, Frankie's not going to be doing splits anymore like that, all that jumping around. So it makes sense to have all those guys out there engaging the audience and singing and dancing. And we used to do a lot more choreography. We have backed it off because it got a little too much for a while.
Yeah. But as long as he keeps going and he keeps entertaining, and you do, the audience is so lucky. I saw you last summer in Liverpool and shook hands with you. And the main thing was getting together with the fans, because obviously in the UK, we don't get so many chances to see you guys. And so everyone is not only a chance to see you guys, but also to get together as a group of fans. And you know Lynn Berlin because you've seen her at all the concerts, and she's been a great coordinator when you've come over to the UK. And that's the one thing about the UK, is because we're so small that we can have that sort of family group. But the great thing that's happened, Robbie, is since we started doing these shows, and the four of us have been sort of analysing our experiences, you know, West Coast Chuck against Anthony. Here's me isolated in Spain now, lost from my friends in the UK. You know, it's great that we've got this community of sharing and discussing our various life experiences. And you said earlier in the show, it's about the emotion that these songs have created. And it's that in each of our lives. Yeah, we're just four guys who are part of the huge hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people who've been affected by the music you do. Yeah. And the fact that
coming over to England was always an extraordinary experience for us. And we always loved that. And it was always great seeing you guys and the whole fan base there. And you're right, it's because it's a smaller thing. So there's really an intimate fan experience there, which is really, really super cool.
Yeah.
We just have such great memories of all those through the decades, since the early 80s, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That is something else. Well, let me tell you, Robbie, and then I'll be quiet, let everybody else. I have taken 4 generations of my family to see you and Frankie Valli. My mom, myself, my kids, and the past 10 years, my grandkids. Just amazing. 4 generations.
That is pretty cool.
I mean, wow. Anyway.
So is there a secret for maintaining such a long relationship, which is of course rare in the music business this long? Yeah, is there some secret involved here?
Yeah, I don't know. You don't see that very often, do you?
Not at all.
And the one thing that I feel thankful about and proud about in certain respects is the fact that besides Bob Gaudio, I've been the longest guy around here than anybody in this 4 Seasons history.
I was just sharing that with Anthony this morning. You're the band's longest band member.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think by leaps and bounds, no question. But I think maybe to answer your question, and I've been asked that a few times, I think the answer is Frankie and I have the same perspective, and that perspective is it's all about the music. The music's got to be great. We never settle. It's always making the great. It doesn't matter about, personalities, or it doesn't matter about egos and all that kind of stuff. It matters about the music. And I have a passion and a love for the music. Frankie has a passion and a love for the music. And so he and I get along 100% on all that, which is great.
That is awesome.
And Frankie Valli is an extraordinary. I feel absolutely blessed to be rubbing shoulders with this guy. I have learned so much for sharing almost a half a century with him, shoulder to shoulder. On like almost all the time. I'm with him more than Bob is, of course,
Yeah.
But I am very, very, very blessed to be able to do what I get to do. And I just feel blessed. I get to do music every day. I get up in the morning excited. I feel like I'm just getting started. I really do.
So are we.
You're blessed to have that feeling.
Yeah, and so are we. We're just getting started. Frankie Valli's legacy is going to live on, and we're going to keep pushing it. And we'll find the next generation to carry it forward too.
And so much so that, they're re-releasing. I talked to Bob last week. They are re-releasing with a new track, Jersey Babies, even.
Wow.
Oh, great.
Well, you were involved in some of the arrangements on that album, weren't you?
Well, that was only Bob and I. As a matter of fact, I played every note on that. And so Bob and I collaborated, and I did all the music here in my studio and sending tracks back and forth to Bob, and that was just he and I. Yeah.
Wow. Great album.
And that's an example of how the Seasons music covers a much broader audience because it has some of the classical sounds we were talking about earlier. It's very mellow and it's very relaxing.
Those melodies too. Walk Like a Man. Oh, that, and Sherry even.
Yeah.
He's got those leaping, almost Mozartian melodies,
It's great. So
I've done a few different versions of some of those songs.
What's the new song going to be out on the new CD?
On the Jersey Babies?
The re-release, yeah.
It's Beggin'.
Oh,
it's done, yeah, and it's out. Now, I think out as of this week or last week, something like that. It's being put out by a new record label. I forget. I think it's the same label that put out the jazz album that we did with Frankie.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Robbie, for all of your time and all the questions this afternoon. It's been fantastic.
I just have a trivia question. This bothers me because I went over that members list and I'm trying to figure out who all these people are. So, and then Chuck had a question too, but I'll ask mine first. Do you know who Ronnie Carangelo is?
Nope.
Yeah.
I may know the name, but it doesn't ring a bell now. Some musicians, came and went, and had a little short experiences.
The drummer from 1971, and I just.
Oh, well, that would be before me, of course. So I don't know that name. No.
And then Chuck was wondering.
I've got a question. Back in 2004, at Frankie's 70th birthday, he performed in the Woodlands, Texas, and I had a chance. My wife and I, after the show, we had a chance to meet with the group, and I gave him a copy of the CD Ediciono de Oro that I wrote the notes for, and you weren't there. So I
wasn't there in 2004.
Taking some time off. Who was the guy that replaced you, and what happened?
I had a guy for a bit when I took a little bit of time off. Rich Kalachi, maybe.
That's who.
I don't know.
But I think that would have been before 2004. I think maybe like 1999 or 2000, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
the show was 2004.
Well, then I must have been there, as far as I know.
And as Chuck just mentioned, he wrote the liner notes for one of the 4Seasons albums, the re-released version of Ediciono de Oro, if I'm pronouncing that correct, in 94, 95, Chuck?
97.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did a great job with those liner notes. Oh.
Wow.
Great writing.
Was that when some of the Fantasy d'Amour and some of those songs?
No. It was a re-release of the Bob Crewe.
It was the re-release of the
1968
double album, the gold record.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there was a problem with the attorney at the time, and he wouldn't let us have access to the
Peter
original
Bennett?
tapes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I won't go into it now, but
But we won't go into that.
it's got the title of Lawyer from Hell.
Take it easy,
No,
Ken.
what was interesting is I had an opportunity to give both Frankie and Bob a copy of the CD.
Great.
Their reaction was both the same. Where did you get this?
Wow.
Neither one of them was aware it was out.
Wow.
It's
It's on
hard.
the Ace label.
Ace, yeah.
There have been so many releases of Frankie Valli and the 4Seasons tracks.
Yes.
We've collected so many, and we've got a CD on our website. There's actually a CD discography with photos of each cover that runs through from 1988 to 2010. It's
that right?
a
Wow.
huge folder. There's been so much that's been released, and we bought so much of it and rebought so much of it over the decades. The plea is just be kind to us, and we need a cheap engineer, because there's 200 plus tapes sitting there in the
Yeah, a
store
lot
in
of
LA,
music.
and they're unmarked. And I can guarantee. Well, we found the
Are
demo.
they 24 track tapes or 16 track tapes, like
They're
2-inch
all,
or 1 inch?
no, they're all safety copy tapes.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there's something like they're 5-inch reels, and there's about 200 of them. And we know that there's some unreleased tracks in there because some of them got mixed up between boxes.
Wow.
But when we were doing the box set, there wasn't enough money in the budget to listen to them all, and Bill Inglett basically ran out of funds. And so what's in the box set is really only a partial review of potentially what could be there. Bill thinks that a lot of them will be demos, which they were, because we found the Peggy Farina demo of Megan. And there's on the same tape was Frankie singing with Bob to both piano. What Good Am I? And nobody had ever heard that song before. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know what happened to it, where it came from. It is just one of those lost gems. And Frankie sings his heart out. And this is only a demo.
Wow.
It's just crazy. If you open the box set and look for it, Anthony will tell you which disc it's on.
Are you saying that maybe there's going to be a box set version 2?
That would be great.
No.
We would say there should be a box set version. We definitely should, because of the rest of the Motown. There's the tracks that Bob Gaudio's got from 2000 that you guys did. There's probably lots of other bits and pieces around in his collection. Plus, you've got some live gems that are recorded. Now, what people want to hear is the songs they heard in concert that don't appear on any CDs, like the one track that everybody's searching for. Anthony, you know it.
I'd rather leave while I'm in love, or
I'd rather leave while I'm in love. We searched and searched. Now, it was supposed to have been recorded at the live Reunited album.
Right.
But Charlie Calello said that the copywriter didn't prepare the copy for it in time.
Wow.
And it missed the session. But then it was recorded, the actual sheet music was used to perform it live in concert. And I know you've done it with Frankie. But
yeah, we've done it. We've done it a lot.
Yeah,
and that's a song that we have talked about for years and years, that maybe we should release that one of these days.
Well,
release a version of that.
Yeah, I think you should. Whether it comes from a previous concert or not. But the thing is that we're always here. We're a team. We coordinate what we think is worth telling the story about. And I'm sure there's a record company somewhere that would put together something, whether it's on vinyl.
And here's the thing now, because everything has changed so dramatically in how music is distributed these days, distributed, I hear both now, but that we don't necessarily need a record label to put out a single. So who knows what the future may hold if we can put out something like the Robbie's Record stuff that I'm putting out.
Exactly.
I think that's perfect, And in the meantime, we'll just keep everybody buzzing with YouTube, and other stuff that we can turn up. And of course, I'm using artificial intelligence to split the tracks.
Wow.
You know, if I've got the seasons in one channel and Frankie in the center and the instruments on the other side, I can split that into 8 stems.
Wow.
I can remix it in Audacity. It's not a problem. It's just a matter of what was the original intention of the producer. What was the sound? But it's always going to be what you would present live. You know,
but there's got to be an audience. That's the other side of that coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
An audience, and there's only at the moment there's only a few hundred servers who are avidly pushing this, and the box set was 2,500 copies, and I don't think they've all sold yet. So we know the size of the market, but it shouldn't be that small. It should be, you know, it may not be the Beatles or the Beach Boys size, but it certainly should be bigger with such a legend.
Sizable.
Frankie, we all think that.
And the 4 Seasons are right up there also.
I mean, the Beatles are such a unique phenomenon. The Beatles, you know, and they were only together those few years, which is crazy. But I mean, and when you compare the Beach Boys and the 4 Seasons catalog, of course, I'm partial, but I have I think the 4 Seasons catalog is obviously more expansive than the Beach Boys.
Very much more, and reaches a wider audience. Because the 4 Seasons catalog for me is various genres of music, rock, pop. I mean, it's just different. Reaches many more ears.
Yeah, there's no decent dance mixes of Beach Boys material, for instance.
Right.
No, there isn't. Exactly.
They didn't dominate the clubs in Ibiza and round Europe, you know, with begging.
No. But don't tell Mike Love that. Oh boy.
But you know what? I love the Beach Boys too, and I was really thankful to be a part of that Beach Boys when we did the East Meets West record too.
That is.
And I still think that could go places. And we've even talked. We still need, if we could do a co-bill thing with the Beach Boys. We've done a few of them here and there through the years, but that'd be a great tour.
Yeah.
Did you do any other songs besides East Meets West with the Beach Boys?
I don't remember doing any other songs. I think it was just that one, which was, if I remember right, wasn't it written by Bob Gaudio and Bob Crewe?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
I remember recording it. We did it over at Sound Labs when Bob and Frankie had that studio. And I remember it was a fascinating time, too, because I'm sitting on the piano with Brian Wilson working on some of the stuff, which was an extraordinary memory.
I've got the alternative mix from those sessions.
I would love to hear that.
Adrian Baker told me there was at least a couple
Bob
other
Audio
mixes.
thinks it's too rough a mix to put it in the box set. He turned it down for the box set, but I think it's because it is a little bit too early in the production process. And I don't think, well, for whatever reason, he didn't include it, but we'll put it out on YouTube, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he'll leave it there.
There is a version that's available on some of the bootleg Beach Boy.
Yeah,
CDs,
it's the same version.
Really?
which is a little bit slower than the released version.
Oh no, it's an alternative to that one as well. Yeah, I've got that one as well.
And I remember we were in the studio, and one of the interesting things was, and all the Beach Boys were there, including Brian, and the Beach Boys were excited because they had not been in the studio with Brian for many years prior to that, because that's when he was under the tutelage, so to speak, or under the auspices of Dr. Landy, I guess.
Yes.
And we were working in the studio, and then he got a phone call from Dr. Landy, who said he needed to come. He needed to leave and come home, and so it was a very disappointing thing when Brian left. You know.
Interesting.
Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to have to wind up the session from.
Yes.
It's clocking on for 11 o'clock here, and
okay,
it's time for my cocoa, as they say.
All right.
All right. Well, we want to thank Robbie for a wonderful interview. Really appreciate it. It was great.
Robbie, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of yours, Robbie. Huge fan.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, again. Thank you for keeping all things 4Seasons alive, and it's an honor to hang out with you cats anytime.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.